My name is Larry Minix. I am privileged to be the chair of the board of Advanced Class, which is made up of consumer, disability, aging, and business organizations that came together after the ACA was passed to make sure that the cause of educating the public about the need to plan for long-term services and supports needs will continue. For those of you that are somewhat new with this, we remember the Pepper Commission that a generation ago said we needed to do something about planning for long-term services and supports, and we spent a generation not doing so until the ACA and the class provisions. So we welcome you. This is an advanced class forum. We just happen to be at LeadingAge having our annual meeting with 9,000 of our closest friends, and this became a convenient vessel in which to keep this issue on the table. As you know, class provides a framework for a new voluntary federally administered consumer finance insurance plan. There are very few successful ways around the world to help people provide for these kinds of unanticipated and expensive needs. And the way class was framed is the best that some of the best thinkers could come up with. We went from 3 or 4 years ago with experts telling us to leave long-term care alone because healthcare needed to be reformed, with the insistence of many of us in the group that you cannot reform healthcare without also dealing and including long-term care. And there were some 270 advocacy organizations that supported inclusion of class in the ACA. With all of the, we've gone from leave it alone, let's worry about it in another generation, we are now controversial. We're actually proud of that controversy because people in the political policy-making circles are now having to address this issue, and it is overdue. We wanted to bring to you today experts who really know this topical area inside out, and the most recent expert that has come forward with the latest actuarial study around class is Mr. Bob Yee. Others on the panel today will include Dr. Judy Fader from Georgetown. Judy has many credentials. I refer to her as the Dean of Long-Term Care Policy in Washington. I hope that's a fair. And she understands these issues. She will moderate the panel. Dr. Gretchen Alkema of the SCAN Foundation is a noted gerontologist and has had a distinguished record on the staff in the Senate. Among her notable achievements is her service as a John Hines Health and Aging Policy Fellow in the office of former Senator Blanche Lincoln, advising the senator and others over policy. The SCAN Foundation is a relatively new major breath of fresh air as a foundation around aging causes in the country, and what we have found, if it's important around education and education about policy, SCAN has been very catalytic in its role to help get these important issues on the table. We like to call Dr. Garner the General Patton of the Class Act. Connie is served for 16 years with Senator Kennedy, and if there is a more knowledgeable and passionate advocate for mental health, disability, and aging causes in Washington, D.C., I do not know who it is. She understands it inside out and personally, and on top of everything else, she's a neonatal intensive care nurse that still practices nursing, and she's one of the few people I know that has somehow found 30 hours in a day to do her work. Mr. Bob Yee is going to talk about his latest actuarial study about class. He was commissioned by and retained by CMS to do it. He has a distinguished career in actuarial science around these issues, having served for a number of years in the country's largest private long-term care insurance organization. And as you know, we're into a whole new actuarial pioneering effort here with class. And so having Mr. Yee come and talk about his study is the latest way we have in advanced class of keeping the most up-to-date information on the table about class, because the media is full of stuff that is not true in some cases, partially true in other cases, politically spun all over the place, and we feel like it's advanced class's responsibility to keep the facts in front of everyone. So thank you all for coming, for the media coverage, for these experts. You couldn't find a better collection of experts to talk about this issue, and we'll get underway. I think, Gretchen, you're going to kick us off, right?
I am.
Thank you.
Thank you, Larry, so much for that introduction, and it's an honor to be here today at the LeadingAge conference, and particularly this policy forum. My name is Gretchen Alkema. I'm Vice President of Policy and Communications for the SCAN Foundation, and as Larry mentioned, we are a relatively new public charity on the scene. Came into being in April of 2008, right in the middle of so much of the activity around health reform and the discussions about how it is that we serve a population of Americans who are growing older, which is something that all of us are doing right now as we're here in this session, and looking at what are the opportunities to bridge medical and supportive services in a meaningful way to help older individuals be able to live well in their homes and communities and be fully integrated into their lives, even in the event of having health conditions, functional impairment, and the challenges that can often accompany individuals as they grow older. So in terms of setting up a discussion that will ensue today with the experts who are here at this table, I wanted to share with you some polling work that we've been doing in California the second year in a row. One of the things that we do at the foundation is really look at what are voter attitudes around the needs, desires, interests of care as individuals age with chronic health conditions and functional impairment. And being able to get a sense of, are people aware of the needs that are coming forth to them in the future? Are they prepared for these needs? To really set up a good policy dialogue that we know is ensuing right now and certainly will continue on in the future, knowing that there needs to be a better way of helping individuals be able to stay in their homes and communities, which is what people mostly desire. So what I'm going to share with you today to set up the discussion is some polling work that we've done here in California. We're a California-based foundation, but definitely work on issues on the national frame. So certainly to this group, it's not news that we have an increasing sense of chronic health conditions. The red are those health conditions that are considered chronic, and the blue being those which are more acute in nature. And we've had obviously a significant change over the last nearly 100 years of people experiencing more chronic conditions as opposed to acute conditions. The things that are in purple are things that could really function on both realms. And that we know that in addition to having chronic health conditions, that people are also having a greater need for daily assistance. That middle circle where it says 27 million speak to those individuals who have both chronic health conditions and the functional impairment, which is often associated with those conditions. This is obviously a major change that has occurred here in the United States and in other countries across the world, which leads to the idea that it's not just about medical services that help people be able to live well and to the best ability independently in their life. There really is a substantial need for long-term services and supports to be able to help people with those daily living tasks as they are dealing with health conditions that are often contributing to the challenges they face on a daily basis. So, like I said, for the second year in a row, we commissioned a survey of California voters in partnership with the UCLA Center for Health Policy Research that really looked at what are voter attitudes, needs, and concerns as people are looking into the future about the needs for themselves or their family members to manage these long-term services and supports. And so back in June, we fielded about 1,500 California registered voters, 40 and above, and to look at some of these issues. And so I'll just share with you a couple of data slides from that poll. The entire polling results are available on our website at www.thescanfoundation.org, so there's more information there if you would like. What's fascinating about this poll is that, again, we surveyed California voters, but the data that I will show you is very comparable to surveys that AARP has done, surveys that Kaiser Family Foundation have done, and others who are concerned about these issues. And clearly, most individuals are worried about the needs and costs of long-term services and supports. They're worried about losing independence as they grow older, their health worsening, but certainly being able to pay for the kind of care that they or a family member may need. In addition, most are underestimating what their future needs will likely be. A major study that the Department of Health and Human Services has put out saying that approximately 70% of those individuals who are age 65 and older will need long-term services and supports at some point in time in their life, and likely for an average of 3 years. And so we, in a sense, asked that question to individuals, and most people answered it wrong. Most people underestimated the need that people will have as they grow older for long-term services and supports. And this is a great concern, knowing that it's very likely that people will need this type of care. In addition, people are unprepared for the cost of care, both unprepared for the cost of nursing home care. Here you can see that almost about 2/3 mentioned that, excuse me, that they could not pay for more than 3 months of nursing home care. We also asked about the cost of care for our part-time licensed personal care aide. Most people are unable to pay for that type of care as well. We gave them the figures, the average figures in California, so they could really look at it relative to their budget. So this, clearly articulates that folks are not prepared for these costs, but are knowing that they're worried about needing to pay for them at some time in the future. We did ask a question particularly about class. We gave them a description of the concept of class in terms of a voluntary benefit, being able to receive a cash benefit for approximately $50 a day, that it would be self-funded, and it gave those parameters. Most individuals were not aware of class in the legislation. Only 2% of California voters knew that class was in there, but once they had heard about the concept that class was seeking to deliver, a majority, and certainly a majority across political parties, also favored the concept of class and seeking ways of how is it that they can mitigate this risk in their life. We also asked about what were voter priorities for elected officials both in the state and at the federal level along the lines of these issues. And clearly the major themes that came out of the survey were seeking affordable coverage for the options of managing this long-term services and supports risk that they saw in their life, affordable care options, seeking enough information about how they can get help if they need help, and then ensuring the quality of care and the choice of care. These were the top-ranking items, and these were also majority responses across political parties. And when we think about this issue, it clearly resonates with individuals, certainly more at this time, I think, than ever. Boomers are certainly seeing the challenges that their families are facing, older relatives in their lives. Many boomers are starting to experience these needs among themselves, among their friend set, and we did some polling work in addition to some focus group work with individuals, and these were the main themes that came out of that engagement that people had about what is important to them as they age forward in their life. And clearly you can see the major words coming out of this language that are being active, being part of the community, having family, being happy and independent. None of these things speak to functional impairment. None of these things speak to the acute care medical system. None of these things speak to nursing home care. People want to be engaged in their lives and are looking for solutions upon which to do that. And so at this point in time, I'm going to turn the panel over to Connie and Judy and Bob, and look forward to a robust discussion about class. Thank you very much.
Gretchen, you've reminded us, and although I don't think this audience needs a lot of reminder of how much this issue matters to people, And I think this audience also recognized how hard it was to get something for them, for people who now or in the future are going to need long-term services and support, into the Affordable Care Act. The burdens on families who experience a need for care we know are huge. Sometimes people say that families ought to be doing more to prepare them, but we know that people's private resources and private insurance are not sufficient to address this problem. And we know that we need a public program as a foundation on which to build meaningful support. And we know that CLAS offers that foundation. A modest benefit, fully self-financing that is intended to assist people who have paid into the program to deal with needs when they arise, whether they are under or over the age 65, because it can happen to anybody, anytime. And then today, in this conversation, we want to talk about, having passed the law, we want to talk about its implementation. I will acknowledge from the get-go, it's not the best of context to be talking about that. The administration having announced on Friday that they see no path to successful implementation at this time. But that gives us an opportunity to put their interpretation, and it is just that, an interpretation, of possibilities associated with implementing CLAS in context by exploring alternative interpretations and perspectives of key actors. Connie Garner, who, as Larry said, and I'm happy to call you General, Patton, it is your tireless efforts on behalf of Senator Kennedy that got this, got CLAS into the Affordable Care Act, and I personally would like to thank you for that. And I want to hear from Connie, who is working on its implementation with the dance class, and Bob Yee, who brought his considerable actuarial experience to HHS in order to implement the law. So welcome to you both. I want to start the conversation with you, Connie. Secretary Sebelius says, and it is generally acknowledged, that it is a challenge to make a voluntary premium finance social insurance program work. To get, simply stated, to get broad enough participation of people who don't now need services to cover the people who do need services. That is indeed a challenge. Now, I know this is not a surprise to you, and I thought I'd ask you to start us off. When you put this together, how did you see that CLAS, the provisions in CLAS, would make for a workable program?
Okay, Judy, thank you. I hope you all can hear. Thank you for having us today, too, because I think it's important that we have a conversation about CLAS, but more than that, to have a conversation about how in this country we need to deal with this issue. Let me take you back for a moment to 2003, 2004. Well, that's a long way away from when this bill passed. But 2003, 2004, Senator Kennedy and Mr. Dingell, who have had, I think, the longest history in this country in terms of development of health care programs, began to look at what was happening in this country, particularly with the Medicaid program. Now, that was in 2003 and 4, and how those roles seemed to be getting larger and larger and larger, and what could really be the reason why. And we began to look at what really was out there to help people who would be able to really needed services and supports to maintain their function and prevent them from slipping backwards. And I will tell you, as a practicing nurse practitioner, and I can speak to the neonatal end of it, I can speak to the pediatric end of it, and to the long-term care, because that's actually what my background was in, to tell you that we do an awful lot of work in healthcare to make people healthy, to get them right, to transition them back to their homes and in the communities, to really deal with the issue that this bill, this particular piece of legislation was about. You don't know who you're going to be 24 hours from now. There's not a person in this room that knows who they're going to be 24 hours from now. But we really don't have any kind of a safety net in this country other than Medicaid right now to be able to accommodate that. We do have products in the long-term care industry. A lot of them are very good. A lot of them are very helpful. But you can't ask that industry that deals on a kind of managing risk the best they can to be able to pick up all of what the requirements are to help people in this country not have to get poor and not have to get significantly in trouble in their health status to be able to get the services and supports that they need. This was the conversation that we had with Senator Kennedy. One of the first things that came out of that conversation is, why can't I buy a product? Why can't I buy one product that has my acute illness and injury and actually the longer services and supports I may need along the continuum of living this life? Couldn't figure that out. We didn't really know. We didn't have the time to look at the history on why that never really came to be. But we began to look at this and said, we need to have an infrastructure, because there's a lot of questions that have to happen when you look at this kind of a program. There is a history with the long-term care insurance industry that's built on an assumption that we actually believe wasn't true. We don't believe that the people in this country don't understand their own vulnerability. We don't believe that they don't care about the vulnerability of their neighbor. And when people say, well, you'll never get anyone to participate in a voluntary program that deals with this issue, that's essentially saying to all of us, we don't want to accept the fact that when we leave here this afternoon, the truck would run right over us, and that would be the end of it. That a car crash could be the way it was yesterday. That a shooting in Arizona would take place for someone who never thought when they went to the grocery store that that was going to be what happened to them that day. We did not believe, and Senator Kennedy did not believe, that the people in this country didn't think about that. There was just no path to go forward at that point in time. The other, and when people say, well, did you think there was going to be enough people to get in it? I'll give you 3 examples of people I think could be all of us. I think the family of the young child that was delivered probably about 9 months ago now, that we saw in our nursery that had osteogenesis imperfecta, which is a bone, the baby's bones are very weak and you turn them, they break, and on 8 weeks into it, this child established that she would be viable. The very first question from that mom was, who's going to take care of him when she goes to school? Who's going to take care of him when I die? Much to the chagrin of the nurses that had spent several months doing everything to keep that baby alive. Right? She had the right to ask that question, what happens? What happens in that unknown period of time? It's about the woman that was on CNN highlighted 2 weeks ago, which was fascinating. And it wasn't about class, it just was her. I don't know if any of you saw it. Who had her hands replaced, her whole hands replaced. Okay? That means the nerves, that means the bones, that means everything in her hands replaced. Worked for 7 years to be able to become independent. She can work her car, she can do everything except a small nail clipper. When I asked our insurance representatives on advanced class whether she would ever be eligible to get long-term care insurance, he said no, never. Nor she will not get life insurance, nor will she not get disability insurance. And please don't be confused, this is not a disability insurance program. Disability insurance is income replacement. This is your money for you to bring you to equal, to be the best you can be in your way of choosing for the rest of your life. I look at that lady on TV, I thought everybody will look and say, wow, that's great, look how well she's doing. Yet we have a system in the country, for whatever the reason, that will not be able to accommodate her. And the last person I think it would have made a big difference for is my granddad. My granddad, who lived until he was 98 years old, crawling up the steps of his house in Willow Grove, Pennsylvania, after he was the court stenographer, actually, for the Lindbergh trial. He did not want to do anything except what he chose to do. He would have never, with his income, been able to afford a continuing increasing premium based on age and his condition to be able to get the supports he needed. But he just crawled up those stairs. So when we thought about this, it wasn't just about kids. It just wasn't about families that want a healthy baby, and unfortunately that doesn't happen. It wasn't about a woman who worked so hard after a huge surgical replacement of her hands. And it wasn't about really just my granddad. But it's about all of us across that lifetime continuum. And that is the reason why this piece was put together. And it was put together very long before healthcare reform. As it turned out over time, it became a very important piece for Senator Kennedy because he began to live what all this is about. He began to understand how important it was to have the supports you need in order to have choices about what your end of life really looks like. He knew he had the resources to do that. He knew the rest of us generally do not. And so that's really what the investment was. This bill was meant to be an infrastructure. This was the Rubik's Cube. This was the Rubik's Cube that we handed to the administration. And we said, you twist this and turn it and twist it and remodel it and be flexible as much as you can until you really are able to get the absolute right answer. And so that was what the intention was. Now, this is new for the administration. I worked in the Clinton administration on the executive side. I worked up on Capitol Hill. I can tell you that the normal routine is for a piece of legislation to come to an administrative branch, an executive branch, very well scripted out, and then very well regulated. And it's hard. It's hard when you work in those offices because you've got nowhere to twist and turn. So what we said was, let us hand you an infrastructure that gave you some fundamental, kind of fundamental parameters, and you twist it, you turn it. It's going to be right, it's going to be wrong, but it's going to change over time. It won't look like it looks now 10 years from now. But at least it will begin to meet what the very huge need is out there that is unfair to ask the private industry to be able to accept 100% responsibility for. And is there a way to do it so that they win too? That everybody wins? This is not meant to be the be-all, end-all for everybody. You need to have a private industry product possibly as well as this. Okay, that's what this was about. I think it was a tall task to ask the administration. I'm not sure they understand how to twist this correctly, but I think they have an obligation to continue forward. So we gave them flexibility. It's in the statute. You can read. There is not a plan there. There's not a program. There isn't even a product to say, is it solvent? There is no such thing in that piece of legislation. There is an infrastructure depending on them to do it. And in fact, there are different places you can point to in the statute that really support that flexibility. And the one that I think is most interesting is what happened with this particular piece at the markup of the health care bill, where we had one amendment from those who really did not feel like this was a good idea. One amendment. And what that was Senator Judd Gregg, who was the budget chairman, who put an amendment on that piece of legislation that said, take out that hard number that you have in there for a premium. Take it out. And let it rise to the top as the Secretary remodels and remodels. That is the best example of legislative intent other than the language that happened during that process that supports what this was really all about. So I think that's my very long, awful answer.
Your passion is appreciated.
I'll just sit here and turn my
Thank you. No, I'm going to take the cue. I'm going to take the cue, and I'm going to give it over here to Bob. So Connie Hayden, she said the legislative intent was to hand you the cue. So, and you came to HHS to take up the task of working with us. Tell us your story in particular. How did you perceive when you took the job that Connie talks about not having specifications, having flexibility in the infrastructure? How did you see the possibilities for making this workable? How'd you come to it?
Thank you, Judy. Actually, before I start, I want to make sure people understand that any statement and opinion that I'm going to express today is really my own, and it's not part of. Clearly, it doesn't come from the Department of Health and Human Services. Okay, that's very important. I want to go back, maybe not as far back as 2003, but maybe around 2009 when the bill started coming out. I was involved as part of the group of actuaries from the American Academy of Actuaries, trying to make some, to provide more information about what, from an actuarial perspective, how this, this bill at that time would play out and what would be some of the implications. And at that time, it was really just a bill. And we spent, quite a bit of work, coming out with what we think. We came up with premium estimates, and we came up with some commentaries about if you make certain changes to it, it might work better. I think we did a pretty good job on that at that point. Now, moving forward, when the bill was passed, one thing that, kept gnawing on my mind is that now the bill is becoming a law. We never gone back, really, and for many reasons, obvious reasons, because this is a voluntary effort, and everybody have, a full-time job. And to really go and look back and say, well, now that we have a set of, languages, can it work? And that's been bothering me for about a year until this opportunity came about when, somebody from the administration of AJ said, well, Bob, are you interested in this job? And I actually took that as a challenge to make sure that, okay, that somebody like me, and it happened to be, okay, paid for it, which is great, to look into, say, well, can you make this work within the confines of the law? And when I started rereading it a couple of times, I came to the same conclusion, like perhaps the intention of Connie, is that like a lot of regulations, and I'm very familiar with state insurance regulations, they set the rules where you play, and people like me as actuaries and product developers play within these rules and try to come up with the best solution to fit within the intent and confines of the regulations. So I totally agree with Connie that this has been set up that way. I mean, the statute is very specific. The Secretary has to come up with at least 3 actuarially sound plans. So the contemplation is not just one, it's got to come up with at least 3. So just that mere requirement tells you that, no, there got to be ways to make this work.
Thanks, Bob. Let me actually, instead of going right back to Connie, let's continue with you a bit.
Sure.
And dig a little deeper into some of the challenges. I think the biggest one that most of us understand is getting broad enough participation so that not everybody in the program needs care, because that insurance can't work that way. So in terms of the selection issue, and you said that the Secretary had to come up with at least 3 plans that were actuarial sound. How have you thought about some of the ideas that, and I know your report is now out, that might be ways to handle this actuarial challenge, this selection challenge in a voluntary program?
Well, clearly that's one of the biggest issues that everybody's struggling with, has been struggling with, is, when you have a voluntary program and you don't have some sort of selection criteria, you may invite people who could gain this, who basically select against you because they get benefit, as soon as after 5 years. So that is one of the, major issues that actuaries and other people have to deal with. And, and the report has several ideas how that works, and I encourage people to read it and make up their own mind whether these may be a feasible idea or not. One of them that we came up with is that maybe there's a way you could control the amount of adverse selection by picking on the number of people who sign up that you think are less selective against you. So that's one way to work. We call it the phased enrollment approach. Go ahead and read the report and try to get more detail into how that works. One thing I think it could be, I want to clarify is that report, there was a class office working on this for about 8-9 months, and there are at least, at some point in time, there are about 14 people full-time working on this. We didn't all work in isolation. We work as a group, and that actuarial report, even though it's only the name of the 2 actuaries on the report, and it was addressed specifically to Kathy Greenlee, I think it should represent the work of the entire group. And this group worked very hard dealing with all the issues that has to do with class, legal interpretations, product design, rulemaking process, administration's challenges, marketing issues. So this is not just simply an actuarial report per se, but it really represents the work of the class office.
Okay, and when you worked in the report, which we all should read and will read, if not already, you felt you came up with a number of options that by which the selection issues could be managed. Is that
Yes, for sure.
So you essentially offered amendments.
Yes, and they're not, we didn't come to estimating the final premium of all these designs, and it's simply because we're at a stage where people should look at the designs, make sure that they're comfortable with it, and then we can move forward. But in my opinion, these are all workable designs. And when I say workable, at the very, very beginning, our office really looking at something that is really, really critical is, what is the value proposition to the consumer? If it doesn't come out with anything. If people don't buy it and not participate in it, it's not very helpful. So we really define what's the value proposition. And the value proposition, and there are a couple of components of it. One is, we're going to set the premium. The premium better be pretty confident, that we have some confidence that this program will be sustainable. That, it's not going to be one day use taxpayers' money to build that. So that is a very, and it's, it's mentioned many times in the statute that this is a requirement. And it's voluntary program, and it said so, it's a voluntary insurance program. So what does that mean? Well, we can't force people to sign up. And also it's an insurance program. That means there are underlying insurance principles that makes insurance work. So these are the basically, I would say, precepts that we use to design the program. The third thing, obviously, is that to have a value proposition, we can't charge premium way over what the private market is charging for similar benefits. Otherwise, why would people want to buy it? And so that's another, requirement in what is the value proposition to the customer. And all the work we have done is trying to put all these requirements together and come up with ideas that we think it might work.
Yeah, and so you raised I think it's good language that all of us can grasp, having a value proposition of something of value to buy. And you felt in the options, I imagine some people would like some of the options, not like some of the options, a lot of values of all kinds come to bear. But did you feel that there is a value proposition to the proposals you put forward?
At this point, yes, without, spending, and this will take some work to come up with the right data to support the assumption to build to the premium. It takes work to do.
Yeah.
But at this point, I feel pretty comfortable that, yes, there are enough ideas out there that we could make it work.
So you essentially, you see it as still a work in progress,
Yes.
but with a core that provides a value proposition.
Yes.
Connie, turning back to you, just to reacting to the way that Bob has put his work forward. Again, thinking about how you began working on the bill that became a law, and continue to work on making it a law. The things that he's proposing, he talked about phasing in some eligibility to keep a balance between those who might need services and making sure there's a broader supporting population to support them, literally. How do you react? Is that consistent with your understanding?
I think what's important is, and let me say thank you to you, Bob, because it's taken 8 years to be able to have actuaries in the insurance industry and really try to work with us on the issue. But I think what it shows, though, is that Bob has come up with some ideas. And so he has his set of ideas. I don't necessarily agree with all of the ideas that are in there, but there are tenets to each one that can be looked at differently over time if we continue to, if you will, turn that Rubik's Cube. We wound up in this situation from a very interesting point of view. If you go back and look at the original bill that we had, it was a voluntary opt-out program. And we had looked at every voluntary opt-out program that had been there in the country, all the way from 401ks down to the provisions that half of you probably know about in No Child Left Behind, where unless you opt out, your kid's personal identifiable information is given to an Army recruiter. So we looked at every possible voluntary opt-out program in the country to see if we would be off base really proposing that. That was not able to stay. That was one piece. The second piece was that we tried very hard and continue to make this work alongside of the private industry products that are out there, which would take us out of this realm of competition and more into the realm of collaborative product design. And so what we had in the original bill was tax credits for the private long-term care insurance, a cafeteria, ability to be on a cafeteria plan at your employment place. We also had provisions in there that both private insurance as well as a classic product could be sold at the exchange. Okay. Both sides of the aisle took it out. So we were left now with a situation where we have a program that we still think will work because as Bob twists and turns with others, this Rubik's Cube, we believe, still going to the original principle that the people in this country really are going to be, and they are now, confronting their own vulnerability enough that we will get the participation. One of the things that was important that we did was to really survey young people. And I had fun with this because I have 7 kids. 4 of them are in college, and 3 of them play college sports. So they're all invincible to the end of the day. And so it was interesting to really do this. We surveyed almost now, I think, 30 colleges, rich kid schools, community college, run-of-the-mill, state-operated schools, and asked in focus groups young people, 18 to 22 years old, about having a program like this. And there were 4 things that really came out of it. One is, do you care? Does it matter to you at all? And I would tell you that I have to give credit to the younger people who have a much more of an appreciation than those who are, I would say, probably 45 and older, that they don't know who they're going to be. They had more kids in special ed classes, they had more kids with boogie board accidents, they had more kids in car accidents. They did understand the principle, which is why they all get rides home from the bar, that they might not make it that next day. So they had much more of an appreciation. Conceptually, could they do it? Yes. Second thing was, what would keep you from doing it? And of course, it was the premium. So if you look at the original bill, we put in there for the beginning conversation a premium that the young people felt like they could manage. That's where the $30 a month, $15 a paycheck came from. Knowing full well it would never stay that way, but trying to put the point across that there was an interest if it was financially feasible and there was still a sellable marketplace there. The third thing that they reported, which was interesting, is when they went home on holidays in the summer, the conversation, the stars sort of lined up around, what are we going to do about grandma? So it really became more of an intergenerational conversation that went on. And the fourth one, which was most important, was what should a benefit look like? And this is where it sort of took a different turn than what the majority of the affordable industry products are that are out there. They said cash. Cash so that it works for me if I fall off a ski lift in Colorado, and it works for my grandma if she needs it. We need the flexibility to make it work for us. So those were the beginning pieces that we actually were able to get from a young, healthy population, generally speaking, that was really going to be able to, move into the workforce at minimum wage jobs. The second group, which is the most interesting group, which we still go out and market and look at right now, are the families of young people who are between 20 and 30 years old. Okay, who have not really worked the 40 work quarters to get a full, any kind of a substantial DI benefit if something happens. But when they fall off the ladder, when they go to beach week, that is a phone call to home at 3 o'clock in the morning to families whose 401ks have been shot because of the economy the last few years. Those parents, when we go to those conferences, are asking, can we pay their premium? Can we pay their premium? So that gave us some direction on how to put this bill together, which is why you'll see there is deference to the younger folks, so that they are able to invest in themselves and in their future, and it also allows, no one cares who pays the premium if they want to. So I would argue that although there is going to still be the need to twist and turn and look at how you do enrollment, how you do eligibility, what triggers you, all that, there's another whole piece out here that has to do with marketing and trust in our neighbors, if you will, that hasn't been touched. And that's the piece that I think we would argue should balance out whatever program is put together.
Let me push on you a little bit, Connie, because I think that that in terms of what you want for a class and wanted when you were putting the law together, you clearly wanted it to be a decent benefit, to be available to people in all circumstances.
This is correct.
And essentially to be able to help those in need as well as those who might have needs in the future. That's a hard thing to do with an insurance program, and Bob has many examples in his report about how to proceed, but even just talking about the phase-in that he's talking about, you speaking, if I may ask you to speak for the group of advocates as well as others who have been working on this bill, are there trade-offs that you're willing to make or have been willing to make going forward to assure workability?
Again, I think there's always trade-offs, and that was the reason to give an infrastructure, so that those trade-offs could be put on the table and they could be moved around. You know that one of the fundamental principles of the bill was that we didn't want to see people underwritten out of a program that they would contribute to. We didn't want that, and that puts you in a terrible bind based on the current assumptions that are in the long-term care insurance industry, because that's the only experience data that's out there to base this program on, even though this program is not the same. But that is the way people need to look at the money parts of things. So we did not want, and I think we continue to want to try to strive to twist that Rubik's Cube around so that we get to the point where we have a program that doesn't penalize you because you fell off the ladder taking your Christmas lights down. Doesn't penalize you because you wound up having a child that's got a whole lifetime that wound up with a disability at birth. It doesn't penalize, not in this country. And I think that's the reason that we tried to do a program that said, we don't want you underwritten, either on enrollment into the program or on your premium as it, went over time. We didn't want to see somebody who was 65 years old, who had worked their whole life, who winds up on a flat income, to have to continue to manage what they can't. And we didn't want to see bottom lines of the sheet assuming that lapse on the sheet. And we don't want to see that. And so we were struggling to try to come up with something, which is a tall task to ask you to work on in the actuaries. But at the same time, our job is to get as many people in this program so that we don't have to do that, and we're able to accomplish.
Again, and I understand that you were talking about what you'd like to see,
Right.
but you recognize you think
We have to make adjustments.
Make adjustments.
Have to make adjustments.
And-
But if the administration doesn't continue to turn that cue, there's not the ability to make the adjustments. There's not the ability to have the conversation on a program that's not even a program yet. And that's where the frustration is.
Okay, and another place that you both have touched upon a little bit, and I don't know, Bob, if you want to say any more about the tools other than underwriting. You talked a little bit about. Do you want to,
Well, again, there's some ideas in the actuarial report.
Yeah.
And these ideas are intended to sort of, comply with the wishes of no underwriting. And there are insurance out there, even private insurance have guarantee issue long-term care. They're in group basis, they have restrictions and so forth. So it's not totally undoable. You just have to find the right, right ingredient to make this work. And, they're going to, have some compromises how it's done. It's not going to be perfect. There's no good solution, but there are clearly workable solutions to make this work. One thing I want to mention is that some of the ideas in the report is not my invention, really. It's not. What it is that what I've taken is practices in other private insurance situations and try to apply it to class. These practices are, they are in health insurance now and they're in life insurance. So it's not an invention as much as just taking some of the idea that private insurance have used to control risk and to make it work within the confine of whatever regulations or conditions that they require to make it work.
Okay, thanks. So it's a good place to go to turn, actually, we're talking about taking lessons from private insurance, but you've also, I think you both mentioned thoughts about how class as a public program would interact or might interact with private insurance, whether it would support it, compete with it, how that might go forward. And that, I think, has been another issue in thinking about how this program would be viable. So would you comment a little bit, Bob, on how you see, and as you have done your work, how you've seen class interacting with private sale of long-term care insurance?
Yes. From a class perspective, definitely, we don't want to come up with a program that's going to compete directly with private insurance. That's not beneficial for either party. And the reason why is because class really, from the class perspective, class is not going to have the marketing allowance to pay agents. At least we're not contemplating. Maybe we have to go there to pay the agent to go and sell it. So that's a big disadvantage. Now, on the other side, from the private, and the other issue is that if class only could get to the lower income market, where private insurance right now are more in the high income market, class is going to have a smaller spread of risk, and that is, again, not good for class. Now, from the private insurance perspective, is that class is going to give a lot of awareness to people, and they have, they don't really want to sell against it. So the whole idea, really, that at least personally, what I think should work is that class should work, together in conjunction with private insurance to offer a meaningful package that would be flexible to adjust people in all income.
Thanks. And Connie, did you have thoughts about our interaction with the private insurers as to how to make this work together?
As it turns out, the very first group of people that we met with back in 2003 were 8 of the large long-term care insurance carriers and talked about this issue and talked about their difficulty they were having, their challenges they were having in the marketplace, and how, if we were able to do this, would it work together. Senator Kenny actually had Senator Grassley at that first meeting. Senator Grassley chose to go forward with tax credits, which I think we're still arguing to try to get for the long-term care insurance industry. And then we began to work with Senator DeWine, who was eventually his co-sponsor on the introduction of the bill. I think he's the Attorney General in Ohio right now. So they worked together on that. But the big thing was we sat with the insurance industry, and they were very fair and square. They shared with us all of the issues they were having with risk, all the concerns they'd have for us, not just in terms of the competition, because that's always a concern, but also just in terms of the modeling and how we would do it. So we began to talk about how could we do this together where, and this is where you get kind of technical, and I want to do that in the front and back and stuff, but maybe the issue is that this gives you some dollar reimbursement to yourself over time, and then at the point where things get really beyond what this can pay for, really beyond what this can do. There's a lot between right now and when I would be really, in a difficult, kind of stage 4 situation, if you will. There's a lot in between there. That maybe that's what to do. Then a 3-year policy equivalent of 3 years would work. So the question was, as they were trying to sell products that they had, rather than doing this shoot with a million different products, was there a way to really get one anchor, at least even to this kind of a program, no matter whether it's the minimum, which we asked for, which was a $50 a day benefit, a minimum of that, the average of that, or one of the other 3 models that was intended to go up the scale in terms of the provision of the money and how they could work together. We felt like that would be a win. That would be the right thing to do for people, because this is not intended to cover everything. It's that window between right now and when things get really tough. And then also it would help everyone as well as the industry. And once that got politicized, it gets harder to do. But fortunately, even now with our Advanced Class Coalition that Larry is the president of, we work with the insurance, we're trying very hard to work with the insurance industry, and they've been very helpful to come to the table and talk, at least temporarily, and begin to look at the issues, particularly that of marketing and raising the level of awareness of what this means all about and what the cost ultimately is to every taxpayer. It's not about a program that's going to be a federal entitlement. You're going to pay for that no matter what, because where you're going to pay for it is in Medicaid. And so it's not really an either-or situation at this point. So that's how we hope to proceed.
Okay. So I want to open the floor in just a minute, but I wanted to ask you one more context question, and there's certainly you've alluded to it in our overall conversation, but I wanted to be explicit about it. That is the legal authorities in the law for the Secretary to turn this into a workable plan. And I'm just looking at that cube and feeling frustrated already. So, Connie, let me start with you, and just very briefly, because we do want to open up. Looking at not what you tried to get, but what you actually got in the law, what is the law. How do you see today the law's authorities as enabling or inhibiting the path forward?
Okay, we believe strongly that the administration has the authority to continue to turn that Rubik's Cube and to find the answer. And we believe that by not only the legislative intent of the bill, but also some of the language that's in the bill. There are provisions in there that give the Secretary this flexibility for special populations. Now, it doesn't say that has to be up the scale or down the scale. It says special populations. And even the Congressional Research Service's analysis of that came out not too long ago never made a decision about what that should be. They argued both sides of what that would be and what it had been in the past legally. So there was that. There was also the provision and the expectation in the bill that if she twisted and turned, really did the work to twist and turn this thing, and it didn't come up with something that was a viable option, that she'd be able to go back to Congress and have it repealed. That language is in there as well. She can't do this on her own, because she's not the Congress. Okay, but she has the authority, and that was the expectation and the legislative intent of it, after she did the work to be able to do it. Bob did his work. He came out with an idea. We're still waiting to see what their idea is, hidden in the appendices that we're reading. So I don't see an idea yet. I just see how hard it is to think outside the box. And so I think that she has the authority. We expect the president to continue forward. We expect him to try to address this issue, because it's very hard if you're going to go into states and say, let's talk about entitlement programs, We need Medicaid to be a respectable benefit for the people that need it. Everyone else needs to have the ability to do something different that works for them, so that we're all not buying the bound book on how you hide your assets to get on Medicaid that they sell in the bookstores. And that's not fair to people who work their whole life to do the right thing. And that's what's happening. So I think there's plenty of flexibility. And Bob, when you're done twisting that flexibility, you're going to have that Rubik's Cube.
All right,
You did the work for me.
there you go. I make this one first. I said, we'll put this one away now. Okay, so now, Bob, I just wanted to ask you briefly. I know we have been drawing on your expertise as an actuary. You are not a lawyer.
Sure.
The legal authorities are not your judgment, but you didn't, as you said, you didn't develop your ideas in a vacuum. You had a team, you were part of the department. As you worked on options, what was your experience of the authorities that the department had to adopt some of the proposals that you put forward?
Well, again, it's when you try to design, product concept, clearly one of the things you have to be, concerned about is whether it's legal or not. So as we developed this over the last 8, 9 months and so forth, that's always been on our minds, how this works. And at least my understanding, at least up to a couple of weeks ago, I thought some of the ideas will get legal clearance. And and reading the final report, over the weekend, I found out that no, it's not. In fact, none of them have legal clearance. It seems like. So my question is really, how are these legal clearance or opinion are formed with assessing the risk of, everybody can sue anybody and anybody can sue, to challenge anything. The question is really, what's the likelihood some of these challenges would be upheld, would withstand or not?
But just what you're saying is that you had a sense that that things were in a workable range, and that is in. And Connie, did you want to comment on that as well?
Yeah, and I got to tell you, I'm sorry that you found yourself in that situation because it's been stated publicly. There's documentation for it. That long after this bill passed and was signed into law, we were assured that because there was a time when there were more pieces that we would have wanted to have in this bill. It didn't work out because of the way the whole politics and conferencing worked. But there was other pieces. And so we were assured after that bill passed that 95% of the things that needed to be done could be done within the bandwidth of the regulatory authority that the administration had. And so, and I think, Bob, that's why you were there, to try to find out where that space really was. So yeah.
All right, so thank you both for sharing your views, and why don't we open the floor to questions? And when you ask a question, please introduce yourself. Yes, sir.
Tom Slimmer with National Church Roses. I guess I'm still left with trying to figure out what you've actually found out with your actuarial analysis, because what we're hearing from Secretary Sebelius is that none of the modeling seemed to work to the point where the premiums created enough voluntary participation to make the program work. ASA, LeadingAge, did their own actuarial work, right? And we had virtually everybody in with maybe a voluntary opt-out, and the program worked for the price of a cup of coffee, Larry. I guess I'm wondering, I'm kind of lost in where we're at with the way this thing got worked out with the actuaries, and interested in what you can tell us about the modeling and what the premiums were, any details that would illuminate our thinking here at LeadingAge.
Well, I would suggest you go and read the report. Really, it sort of lay it out, and if you don't understand it, please call me and talk to me about it. The basic conclusion, at least on the actual report, is that there are certain design ideas that would make it work. And make it work is to deliver a value proposition to the consumer.
Which means
That
an
includes
affordable
price,
premium.
affordable premium. Yes.
Connie, did you want to comment?
I was just going to say, so I think where it's at, to answer your question, is that they need to keep going. They need to keep, the administration needs to continue this process. They need to look at Bob's paper in a reasonable way. They need to look at what his suggestions are, even if they don't agree with it. They need to get out there and have other people begin to model and look at how to get this done as well. They need to bring in the insurance industry for whatever perspective they have to offer. And that it's not time yet to really, there's so much discourse about actuarially, number one. Number two, do we have a legal authority? Number three, that it's not time to stop this conversation. I think that's what the issue is. They were given the time to do this. And so there's no reason why that can't continue. And I think Bob's report and the other work they have there shows that. So that's kind of where it's at.
And actually, just the way I read some of the statements, when you look, there were the premiums, when the comment is made that the premium was quite high, that was under a certain set of design assumptions. And then the discussion goes on about alternative design assumptions and the legal risks associated with making those design assumptions. So I think you need to look at the whole package to both the design assumptions and the interpretation of authorities in understanding where the department has come down.
Is that detail in the paper?
And in the reports that Kathy Greenlee.
The alternative designs and premium levels associated with them?
Not necessarily premiums associated with them, but I think that the issues about ways to, what I'm saying, I believe is correct, is that where you see dollars, they're associated with particular designs, but those are not the only designs that are on the table.
And then you have to look at where CBO came from. I mean, they have hired actuaries there that we depend on to do their job every day. And they came across with a whole different set. It's all the assumptions. They came across with a different set of assumptions, a different participation rate. And so it speaks to the issue of continuing the conversation, because the problem's not going to go away. That's the issue.
Yes, sir.
One of the...
Would you introduce yourself,
Oh,
please?
Steve Monroe.
From?
Larry, I'll be next, don't worry. I'm the editor of a newsletter called the Senior Accounting Master.
Okay.
One of the criticisms of the Class Act was that the billions of dollars those first 5 years that were going to be coming in when there was no benefits available, that was going to be used to fund whatever portion of the Accountable Care Act. And it was a legitimate criticism. As you try to reinvigorate Class Act, are you going to put on the table something where all those premiums that come in will be put in true reserves, not government IOUs like Medicare and Social Security, so that the elderly who do pay in know there will be actually something there for them?
Thank you for the question, because just as I had talked about the fact that we had tax credits for long-term care insurance, we had the cafeteria option put in there that was taken out by both Democrats and Republicans, the most fascinating part of this was that we had all that money in a lockbox. And that was the original proposal that was sent to be marked up. All of the money was put in a lockbox, and the minute that Democrats and Republicans on the budget committee saw that, they ran right down and said, get that out. Get that out, because we don't want to set a precedent that we would have to do that. And then turned around the next week and said, Ponzi scheme, Ponzi scheme. So, the first time you've heard that, but that's exactly what happened. So, does it need to be put aside? Now, the other piece of this, which makes it more legitimate, than what you're presenting, is that if you look at the health care reform bill, again, this was done way before the bill ever passed. If you look at it, and you take the budget window, which you're stuck with, the budget window, and you add up all of the savings versus all of the spendings, and then you subtract out the money that represents class, they have still paid for the health care reform bill in total with savings left over, without even thinking about class. So that does justify the fact that it was not used at the end of the day to offset what the cost of health care reform was. To go back to the construction of the bill, that 5-year window had nothing to do with health care. It was put in 8 years before that health care reform bill ever came up. The reason we had that 5 years in there was because we weren't going to underwrite, so we wanted people to be working, number one, and number two, to pay in for 5 years, both because that was kind of our way of sort of trying to get at the no underwriting issue, but also to make sure that it worked, because figure by year 3, if you don't have the enrollment that you need, then you got to pull the plug before you get into trouble. So that was really the reason, nothing at all, technically, as it was written, to do with health care reform. We got caught in a financial way they do business with the government. Barb?
Yes, I'm Barbara Manning, and I have worked with you all, as you know. And I just wanted to bring up, for those of you who didn't know, because this budgeting is complicated, that after the Class Act had passed, and there was always whoopity-doo, in January of 2010, the PAYGO Act of 2010 was passed, and it says explicitly that going forward, the class money in the trust fund can never be used to offset any other things in the budget. So that's as close as you can get, because we don't have any, we don't save our money in like a savings
You can't
account
put it on
for
your
anything.
expense. I can't put it
Yeah,
on
you
your
really
expense.
can't. And it's the same thing. There are, everyone says, well, all there is IOUs in there. Well, that's absolutely true. That's all there is in private insurance reserves. Also, there are bonds from companies which could go bust, and there are treasury bills and bonds which we hope are good. So that's true in the private sector as well as in the public sector.
Okay. Mark?
Mark Miners, George Mason University. Bob, I wanted to ask you a little bit, and all of you actually, about the dynamic of what was rejected. Because as I quickly looked at your report, I saw that you actually had proposed some options, and I remember that there were supposed to be 3 options, and then the secretary was supposed to choose one. And when she announced that there was some flexibility in the one-size-fits-all, I thought, well, maybe there was this idea that you could actually have multiple options within the class family. And I actually see that you use that term. And you had something called the class partnership policy. But now you also talked here this morning about the legalities. And I wondered if there was this wild card where the secretary actually ultimately really only could choose one of the array of options, or whether you felt there really could be multiple options within the family. And if it's that they only choose one, maybe that's why they're backing away. Could you elaborate?
I'm not sure that's, and I don't know why they're backing away. Clearly, one of the ideas is to have options, optional plans, and it seems to be workable legally. Except I think most people would think that all the option has to comply with the statute. That's.
Go ahead.
I just want to say one thing, because I was very involved.
You stand up.
Yeah, very involved in drafting that language about the number of plans that the advisory commission would receive to consider. And that concept of having some plans developed in an advisory commission working out details and saying we like the blue one better than the green one was explicitly modeled on the Medicare Commission that developed all the details of that. We learned that one late night searching the internet and found an old paper of Judy Fader's about that. So that's where that came from. But on the multiple plans, honestly, what we were thinking about, now, this is literally what we were thinking about, is this commission's, poring over spreadsheets and printouts, and the multiple plans were, well, if you tweak the benefit from $50 to $52, then the premium goes from X to Y. And there's 1,000 different ways you can vary that. And that's why you need human beings to say, we think the best thing to get the best value at the most likely sustainable plan would be the one with the $62.53 that would produce that. So it wasn't 3 totally different structured things in the concept, but it's not specified in the law. I'm telling you what was behind that, but it's not a report saying that. So that can be interpreted in many ways, but it doesn't mean there's nothing in the law that says there've got to be 3 vastly different plans. They could be tweaking little pieces. Thanks.
But it doesn't prohibit.
No, it doesn't prohibit. It's the Rubik's Cube.
I'm Alvin Bloomberg from Morningside Ministries in San Antonio. The LeadingAge task force, financing task force, that worked on this for a number of years, and Barbara headed that up as a staff member. One of the primary objectives of that was to offer some assistance over the years to a unsustainable Medicare, Medicaid program. I haven't read the document. Maybe I should go do that before I ask the questions. But I'm assuming that that's still a primary objective of the Class Act. Is that right?
No, I think that was the beginning intent of it. Was, as we were looking at, we were thinking about it, and then found that you were looking at the same thing. But absolutely, and actually, it was a good spot. There was a good spot on CNN on this morning. There was a whole big long CNN thing on this, where they pointed out the fact that the majority of people in the country don't understand that Medicare's got a short-term rehab benefit, and that's the end of it. Okay, and that Medicaid is Medicaid, but you have to be poor, not have assets. You got to be pretty significant before you can tag a lot of the benefit around this. So of course, if you want to have those programs sustainable for people who need them and have a respectable benefit, we need to try to close this window. But absolutely, that was an intent.
Well, in light of that, one of the discussions we had at LeadingAge way back then was that, do you ever see the possibility of this program being mandatory? Like with maybe instead of a premium amount, maybe a 1% payroll tax that's matched by the employer. I realize this is not the political tonic to discuss this in, right? I mean, do you ever see that as a possibility?
I have to thank you for bringing that up, because actually the Minister of Health in Israel came to see me about a month ago and continued to say over and over again to me, because they're going to do it over there. They have a 68% voluntary program where they have participation. 68% is what they penetrate the marketplace with a voluntary program. So he took this statutory language to see what they could do. And all he kept saying was what you said, is, why didn't you make it mandatory? Why didn't you make it mandatory? And I said, mandatory is tough in this country. Can't get vaccinations really to be mandatory anymore. It's a tough conversation. He kept saying it over and over and over again. And finally, I said back to him, because I'm a nice Catholic girl married to a nice Jewish doctor, I finally said back to him, I don't know, maybe it's because I'm a shiksa, but we can't get it in. But he had the hardest time trying to make sense of the fact that a mandate in this country is just too hard. Where I do think, it would be great if we eventually go is with the employers, because there's frankly, that language in the law is very cloudy. The changes that were made to that is very, very cloudy. And it appears that there's no prohibition on the part of an actual employer, if they want to make it a voluntary opt-out. We've talked a lot to OPM, hoping that maybe they would make it a voluntary opt-out alongside of a private product. So that might be the best hope, again, if we can continue to turn the Rubik's Cube. An employer can do it. And in fact, I will tell you, I've been to see universities. I spend a lot of time with the younger population issue on this, and primarily because I have these kids who play sports. And so the very first place I go in the universities is to the sports people, because they know the vulnerability of their players the next day. And they have been very good on two major campuses, one in the Northeast and the other in the South, that said if this program comes to be, they will auto-enroll all their employees, because they understand the benefit of this. So that's why we want to see this continue to move and turn and give someone something they can kind of hang their hat on, other than not at this time. Right?
Other questions? Yes, sir.
Sahil Kapoor with Inside Health Policy. I'm curious, CBO said this morning that they're going to assume no budgetary impact of a possible repeal of the Class Act. And some are speculating that this is going to make it a lot easier to politically get rid of the program, assuming it's to be restructured rather than repealed, and also assuming that HHS stands by its decision not to implement it in its current form. What would you say are the most important policy changes that they can make to try to make it work, given their concerns?
I actually, did you want to, pardon me? Well, where I'd go with that, I think that I understand the CBO decision to be if they're not implementing, then the premiums aren't collected and the savings aren't there. And that was actually a foreseeable response to a decision not to implement it this time. I think you've heard from both parties here a lot of the elements of a program that can be changed that both parties here are saying are within the authorities of the law. So the view presented by Connie and Bob is that the Secretary has the authorities to come forward and implement the law as she is charged with doing. Other questions?
Yes. Shirley Barnes with Custody Senior Communities in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And to go back to the employer comment, I wanted to build on that perhaps as a comment more than a question. I think we have done a whole lot of admiring of the so-called challenge of aging in this country, and we continue to do that. And this Class Act offers a solution to what is considered a challenge of the aging population. When it comes to job and employers, I think one of the things that every major city and the entire country is looking at is how do we preserve jobs in this country. Certainly as aging services providers, we are one of the areas that can preserve jobs, that can create jobs. And how can we, as we go forward, help Congress to understand that we are a major economic development driver in every single major city? And on a comment, and if a group of college kids can understand this better than Congress, send them there and let them march on Washington.
I think your comment stands on its own. Anybody else? Well, I want to give thanks to Connie and Bob both for their efforts.
I too would like to thank our panelists and our experts, Gretchen and the Scan Foundation, for your interest. One thing that is puzzling to me, as someone who's been working on this a long time, is the Secretary says she does not see a path forward at this time. But what I'm hearing from Mr. Yee and Connie Garner and Judy Fader is there are paths forward, and it is premature to shut off discussion. So what we're going to be pushing for is keep the discussion alive, because we don't have the specific answers yet. And why anyone wants to shut off discussion at this point is beyond me. I'm speaking as with my other hat on. We're going to be pushing the heck out of that conversation to move forward. And Mr. Yee's and work with his colleagues just raises the issue for me. So why are we stopping talking about this? Now, they insist that they haven't shut anything down, and they want us to help them get that message across. And we said, well, if you haven't shut anything down, why does that seem to be the message that's so pervasive? And so we're asking them to be assertive about clarifying the message now, that this is an important topic. It is a need that is not met. In our work on the Hill, Democrats, Republicans understand that this is a problem that has to be solved. You cannot print enough money in Medicaid for Medicaid to be the fallback for everybody. And therefore, we've got to come up with a common way to address this together. And you know what? That law provides a framework for doing just that. But this is the time for public discourse, not the shutting down for public discourse. So what we see here today is the history, some policy leaders, the latest studies. We hope that we can convince the administration to clarify their message, that we need to solve this problem together. And I can tell you this, the day it happens to your mother or your child, R or D or independent, doesn't matter. Everybody said, where are we going to get help to deal with these kind of issues? All of a sudden, the playing field is level when it's your mother or your child. And that's where we need to keep this conversation going. I hope the press will push on the fact whether class, exactly as any of us envision it, is ultimately implemented. The problem has to be solved, and if you look at other countries, there are solutions. So why stop the discussion now? And I suspect that has more to do with politics than it does policy. We've got to keep this thing focused on policy because the politics of it is complicated, it is duplicitous, and we've got to keep them honest about the political discussion. So thank you all very much, and the contribution that each of you are making as thought leaders to these topics, and we'll keep working with the White House to keep it going. Thank you.